And the story goes that between 1929 and 1932, more alcohol evaporated than was sold. Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time, or 4 tiny bottles at a time today. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon. In my episode about Bottle 82, Canadian Club, I talked about its origin story, how the brand's founder, Hiram Walker, came to Canada, established a company town called Walkerville, and created a special club whiskey that eventually came to be called Canadian. But that all happened by the 1890s. And since Bottle 82 was from 1972, obviously the story didn't end there. Hiram Walker died in 1899, and the business passed into the hands of his 3 sons. The last of them died only 20 years after Hiram himself, and in 1919, the grandsons took over the business. Just like with the Seagram story, the 3rd generation had been raised in luxury and wasn't particularly interested in the stinky old liquor business. That was also the year that the US enacted Prohibition, and the grandsons decided they didn't want to get caught up in the business of selling whiskey to bootleggers. So after a few years, they sold off the company to someone who did, Harry Hatch. Hatch is another one of the great icons of Canadian distilling. Like Mr. Sam from Seagram's, he was a big personality who knew what he wanted and how to get it. His first purchase was Toronto's Gooderham and Worts distillery in 1923, followed by Hiram Walker in 1927. He paid $14 million, which was an amazing deal, since the whiskey stocks alone were worth that much. He also got the distillery and the trademark for Canadian Club. At first, things were going great. Hatch had no moral qualms about bootlegging, and by 1929, profits were through the roof. Unfortunately for him, that was when the US kicked up its border patrols. Sales plummeted, and the story goes that between 1929 and 1932, more alcohol evaporated than was sold. But Harry persisted, and with the end of Prohibition in 1933, the business was on an upswing again. More mergers and acquisitions followed, and the combined Hiram Walker Gooderham and Worts company continued to grow. Meanwhile, Harry was also busy kickstarting the table wine industry in Canada and investing in thoroughbred horse racing. When Harry died suddenly in 1946, his son Clifford took over the business. In the 1950s, the Canadian whiskey industry was going gangbusters, and in 1960, Hiram Walker opened the distillery expansion that would feature so prominently in my childhood, as I talked about in Bottle 82. But that was the peak. By the mid-1960s, tastes were changing and people were turning away from whiskey and towards lighter spirits like vodka and tequila. By the 1980s, as I talked about in Bottle 87, Kittling Ridge Ice Wine and Brandy, there were only a handful of distilleries still in operation, and they weren't doing well. In 1980, Hiram Walker first sold itself to an oil and gas company. Then, fearing that they were going to be sold on to rival Seagram, they organized a sale to Allied Lyons, who would go on to be called Allied Domecq in 1994. And finally, with that sale, we come to bottles 88 to 91, this adorable 4-pack of Canadian Club bottles packaged in a little plastic barrel. Allied Domecq is another one of the giant liquor companies that took a turn lurking behind all your favorite brands. By the end of the 1990s, they controlled many brands that have previously appeared in My Tiny Bottles episodes, such as Tia Maria, Maker's Mark, and Courvoisier Cognac. And, since their acquisition of Hiram Walker, Canadian Club. But Canadian Club was not a star. In a 1999 newspaper article, a representative of Allied Domecq talked about how they needed to almost restage the brand. And as part of doing that, they introduced a few new styles of Canadian Club. In 1998, ads started appearing for Canadian Club Varietals. My barrel of bottles has one of the regular 6-year-old Canadian Club, plus 3 new bottles. A 10-year-old reserve bottle with a blue label, a 100-proof version with a black label, and a Sherry Cask finished bottle. Interestingly, this marketing appears to have been aimed at the United States. My barrel has imported on it, so it must have been bought in the US and brought back to Canada for Grandma. The other amazing thing about this particular object is that I haven't been able to find another example of the little barrel of bottles anywhere online. There are collectors who have the individual mini bottles, but not in this 4-pack format. The different specialty bottles appear to come and go throughout the 2000s. The 100-proof version seems only have been around for a few years. The Sherry Cask version had a big push in 2011, which caused me a lot of confusion when I was doing my research because I knew these had to be from before then. The only one currently in the lineup is the Reserve, although it's now been downgraded to 9 years from 10. Alas, Allied Domecq's restaging of the brand did not include packaging their miniatures in premium glass bottles, so these all have some evaporation. But I'm still looking forward to comparing them. I'm starting to get a backlog of Canadian whiskey, so if you have recommendations for people I should taste with, let me know in the comments below or at mytinybottles.com or on social media. I'm at TammyLC on Blue Sky and at MyTinyBottles on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks for watching, and please like or share to help other people find these episodes. Cheers!